I would start off, I might say, trying to disabuse anyone of the notion that we're going to solve the environmental problems of the world. We're not. On the other hand, I think we will get some specific things out of the conference. We will get a number of things started, and in the most significant manner, we will have established an international forum in which this whole business can be continued, and I think it's going to have to be continued for probably the next 20 years, with meeting perhaps once every 5 years to see what's happening. Now, rather specifically, and the first, this doesn't sound as if it were a great accomplishment, but I can assure you that it is. I think already the preparations for this conference, which have taken place now over 2 years, have created an environmental awareness in the world that just simply didn't exist before. Some 80 countries have now deposited with the United Nations a national report on their own domestic environmental situation. And of those 80 nations, I'd suppose 50 had never heard of the environment. They'd never considered it. They didn't know it existed as a problem. They've had to look at the thing. Many of them have had help from developed countries in preparing this report. But in this sense, and because we've had 4 preparatory committee meetings, and because we've had a number of international working groups dealing with specific problems, conservation, ocean dumping, whatever it might be, you've already, in terms of country participation, had an enormous amount of new knowledge, an increased awareness, and a feeling that this is something that has to be taken into account. Well, in terms of specifics, we are hoping very much to be able to sign at Stockholm or shortly thereafter an international agreement on ocean dumping, whereby countries pledge themselves by agreement not to dump certain substances, to put certain substances on a permit list, and generally to control their own dumping, and thus to control the amount that goes into the seas. This is something that the developed countries, the industrialized countries, account about 95% of it comes from the industrialized countries, and as you know, the President has asked for domestic legislation controlling dumping from the United States. We're trying to internationalize this. We'd also hope to see signed at Stockholm or shortly thereafter a number of conventions in what you would call the general conservation area. Endangered species, for example, the export, import of animal hides, this kind of thing, putting certain species on the endangered list, a World Heritage Trust whereby you can set aside under international management certain cultural, historical, and natural areas, kind of for the benefit of mankind. This kind of thing we would like to see established. I think we will. An international bank for conserving genetic resources of both flora and fauna, something the scientists are very keen on so that we don't lose species, so that there is a central bank in the world. Well, these are a few specific things. We will make long strides toward establishing international criteria on health effects of pollutants. The reason I think this is important is that much of industry in this country would like us to see establish international standards. This we cannot get acceptance on at the present time because the geographic conditions for various countries vary so. They won't accept standards that may apply in one place properly but don't apply to another situation. However, if we can get agreement on criteria from which you base standards, that is the scientific effect of certain pollutants on human beings, on flora and fauna, then from this we can hope to get what is very close to the same national standards established throughout the world.
Are you going to be talking about money?
We are going to be talking about money, but if I may continue for just a second, the second major area in which we really hope to make progress, and think we will, is in the area of knowledge. I use this as a general term, in monitoring what is happening in the world because nobody knows. There's a great deal of scientific speculation about what's happening in the atmosphere. The difficulty is we've got no way of telling. We've got no baselines, we've very little equipment for monitoring the world's atmosphere, the world's oceans, what is happening on the land. We've got to some point get started with this. Information exchange. The reason that this is important is that any number of countries are doing certain things about certain problems, whether it's sewage systems, whether it's tropical forestry, whatever it may be, and the difficulty is no other country knows what they're doing, so that there's no way of passing on this experience. We've got to centralize research. I don't mean setting up a new research organization, but trying to find out what is happening in the whole field of research, so that in this area of knowledge, monitoring, research, information exchange, we hope very much to set into motion systems whereby the world will know what is happening to itself. Lastly, we want to get and develop institutional arrangements so that within the context of the UN, and we're going to have to start with the UN, it's the only worldwide organization there is, we can get an efficient, non-bureaucratic, effective coordination in this whole area, and we can finance and direct the programs that we think are necessary. And for this purpose, the United States has tabled a number of very specific ideas in the way of a resolution for not creating a new specialized agency, but for creating the machinery, including a fund which the President proposed of $100 million over 5 years, and indicated our support would be at the level of 40% on this fund to actually finance global programs. Now, if we can get this much done, then a whole series of other specific measures will in fact be taken over, if you want, by the Environmental Secretariat, if we can get it established, for the purposes of implementation.
So you're going with an air of real optimism, aren't you?
Yes, I am.